Our study today is Nehemiah chapter 2. I like to think of this chapter as showing us both the obvious and the not so obvious, the overt and the subtle. We can understand much of the subtlety in a passage like this by looking at its geopolitical and historical setting. How do we do that? Well, to help us, many Bible resources are available, books that help us correlate, investigate, and explain Bible passages. These give us insights from historical, archaeological, and literary sources. Chances are, if you have wondered about the meaning of a Bible passage, others have wondered the same thing and have written articles and books about it. As we get started, this is our Bible study tip for today. Make use of good Bible study resources. For instance, we can use Bible dictionaries to find out about the people, places, and things mentioned in Nehemiah's history. We can track the historical events and geographic locations in Bible atlases. Many of these are more than books of maps. They give us a chronologic history of ancient times. We can consult Bible commentaries, such as the Message of Nehemiah in the Bible Speaks Today commentary series, to see what scholars have said about these passages. This particular commentary has been made available to our small group leaders at Lighthouse. If you don't have any of these resources, that's okay. A good starting place might be a comprehensive study Bible. These are Bibles that include scripture commentary, articles, maps, word definitions, book introductions, cross-references, timelines, outlines, and other helps. The three popular study Bibles shown here are excellent, and each of them is over 2,000 pages of useful information. This is like having a mini library in one book. What's more, they are relatively inexpensive, often on sale, and available in digital form for your mobile device. Using reference books such as study Bibles, we often find that things just make more sense. We learn the Bible in more depth, and new meanings and applications are brought out. So as we study the second chapter of Nehemiah today, resource books can help us understand the passage in context. We have already met Nehemiah in the Persian city of Susa in chapter 1, where we find that he is the cupbearer for King Artaxerxes. Now we see Nehemiah seeking permission from his king to rebuild Jerusalem. This is a difficult, even risky proposition, given that Artaxerxes had previously ruled against such permission, and the king has absolute authority. Regardless of one's personal problems, the king's servants were expected to keep their feelings hidden and to display a cheerful countenance before him. "I was seized with great fear" expresses well the anxiety that must have gripped Nehemiah, well knowing that the king himself had stopped the Jewish efforts at rebuilding the wall. Not specifically identifying Jerusalem by name, Nehemiah succeeds in gaining the king's support for his plan to rebuild the city of his ancestors. Just looking at the extent of that support, transport to Judah, authorization letters, travel protection, building materials, and lodging, shows us that Nehemiah has built up a lot of credibility with the king, who clearly believes in the trustworthiness, ability, and resourcefulness of his cupbearer. As we start the story, it would be easy to gloss over the very first phrase, "in the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes." But if we know the Hebrew calendar, it would be evident that 4 months have passed since Nehemiah's prayer in chapter 1. What do you think Nehemiah did during those 4 months? Apparently a lot, as we see in this chapter. If this were a play, the second act would start with verse 9, where the scene shifts. Nehemiah makes the long journey from Susa to Jerusalem, accompanied by Persian officers and soldiers. This was probably not an easy or quick journey, but the Bible tells us about it in one sentence. And now we encounter for the first time Nehemiah's opponents, Sanballat, governor of Samaria, and Tobiah, the Ammonite. And later in this chapter, they are joined by an Arab named Geshem, and in chapter 4 by the people of Ashdod. You might wonder where these guys come from and what authority they have, since they are so far removed from the central Persian Empire. The supreme authority, of course, was Persia and King Artaxerxes. The empire kept control of things by organizing regions based on geography, political affiliations, and people groups, each with its own ruler or governor, and by keeping military forces in these areas. The rulers had a certain amount of autonomy, acted like kings, and collected taxes for themselves and for Persia, but they were ultimately under Persian rule. Sanballat was governor of Samaria. Centuries before, Samaria had been the capital city of the northern tribes of Israel. When the northern tribes were conquered by Assyria in 721 BC, the Israelites were driven out and ultimately replaced by other people moving into the area. These new inhabitants adopted Judaism and blended it with other religions, and this is a no-no. We call this syncretism. We modern-day Christians would be well advised not to blend our faith with unbiblical elements. Eventually, the surrounding area became known as Samaria, and its people Samaritans. Sanballat might have considered himself a follower of the God of Israel and thereby have some claim on Jerusalem. He gave his two sons Israelite names, though his name is Babylonian. Tobiah may have been at least partially Jewish. Some scholars believe that his ancestors came in with the returning Babylonian exiles, but could not prove their Israelite descent. Others think Tobiah's family may have originally fled to Ammon after the destruction of Jerusalem. Tobiah is an Israelite name, and he certainly had influence in the Jerusalem temple. So like Sanballat, he could feel that he has some claim on Judah. However, from verse 10 we know that neither of these men had the welfare of the Israelites in mind. During the time the Israelites were absent, Arabs came into Palestine and even became dominant in many areas. Geshem was an Arab leader who ruled over the southern lands. You may know that many Palestinian Arabs who see themselves as descendants of Ishmael, Abraham's eldest son, or Shem, Noah's eldest son, to this day claim Palestine as their land. Judah is essentially hemmed in by these men and their territories. Sanballat borders the north, Tobiah the east, Geshem the south, and to the west, Ashdod and the Mediterranean Sea. None of them would want a new nation in their midst, and in fact, it would not be surprising if each of them had their own designs on the land and wanted to expand their own spheres of influence in the region. It is remarkable that such diverse leaders would team up to oppose Israel. So this is the cultural and political situation in which Nehemiah finds himself. Even though Artaxerxes has appointed him governor of Judah, something we find out about in chapter 5, he is totally unacceptable to the local powers that be, who view him as a threat to their authority. There's a lot we learn by knowing the setting of Nehemiah, isn't there? It helps us answer lots of questions like, why did Nehemiah need letters from the king in order to go on his mission? Why did he need military protection? Why were the local governors distressed and angered by his arrival in Jerusalem? Why did Nehemiah go out to inspect the walls at night? Why did he feel the governors should not have a role in rebuilding the Jerusalem walls? And why did they think they should? Lastly, let's look at things from the Israelite point of view. It's been 70 years since the first Jews returned to their homeland, and very little has actually been accomplished. Discouragement and inertia have set in. Then here comes this guy, a real Jew, a personal envoy of the king of Persia, given authority to govern Judah with official letters of authorization, and he is accompanied by a Persian military escort. Wow, talk about the cavalry coming to the rescue. This is a guy who comes from the capital Susa. He's inspected the walls of Jerusalem, and he's done his homework, and he knows that God's hand is on him. His name is Nehemiah, and he will not fail. Something like this has never happened before. Not with Zerubbabel, not with Ezra. So when Nehemiah says, "Come, let's rebuild the wall of Jerusalem," the immediate response of Israel is emphatic. "We're with you, Nehemiah. Let's get started."